Hey guys, welcome back to this quiet corner of the night, a space where the noise of the modern world finally fades into a soft, distant hum. Tonight, we're not journeying to gilded palaces or sweeping battlefields. We won't be charting the rise and fall of kings or the grand designs of empires. Instead, we're going somewhere deeper, somewhere darker, somewhere beneath the stone floors of the castles you know. We're descending a set of damp, worn steps, following the faint echo of dripping water into a place where sunlight is a forgotten myth and hope is a fragile currency. We are stepping into the chilling reality of the medieval dungeon. It's a place that haunts our imaginations, but its true story is one of profound human endurance against unimaginable hardship. Before we unbolt that heavy iron door, if this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. For now, just get comfortable. Let the world settle around you, dim the lights, and allow the weight of the day to drift away. We are leaving the present behind and stepping into the cold, silent dark of the past. Before we descend into the dungeon itself, let's first paint a picture of the world above it. The medieval period was a time without the structures of justice we take for granted. There was no professional police force to investigate crimes, no standardized legal code that applied to everyone, everywhere. Justice was local, it was personal, and it was often incredibly swift. In a village, your accuser might be your neighbor, and your judge, the local lord whose word was law. It was a system built on a mixture of custom, oath, and raw power. Public punishment was a part of the fabric of daily life, a constant and visible reminder of the social order. You might walk through the market square and see someone locked in the stocks, their legs trapped in wood, not for a heinous crime, but perhaps for baking a bad loaf of bread or selling watered-down ale. You might see another in the pillory, their head and hands secured, subject to the scorn and refuse of the crowd for a petty theft. This wasn't hidden away. It was theater, a brutal and direct lesson for all to see. Justice wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about deterrence, retribution, and maintaining a fragile, often violent, peace. This was the world that decided who was free and who was not, a world where the line between liberty and confinement was perilously thin. So, how did one end up in the clutches of this system? Destined for the darkness below, the reasons were as varied as the people themselves. For many, it was simple desperation. A starving peasant caught poaching a deer in the Lord's forest could find himself in a cell. A family unable to pay a debt might see their father taken away, held not as a punishment, but as collateral. Theft, brawling, and public drunkenness were common paths to a short, sharp stay in a local lockup. But the dungeons also held those accused of far more serious offenses. A murderer, a suspected spy, a heretic whose beliefs challenged the authority of the church, or a nobleman accused of treason against his king, all could find themselves sharing the same grim fate. It's crucial to understand that the modern concept of a prison sentence, a set number of years to be served as punishment, simply didn't exist for most. The dungeon was primarily a holding pen. It was a place to keep you while awaiting a trial, which could be months away. It was a place to break your spirit before interrogation and torture. And for many, it was the final waiting room before a public execution. The dungeon wasn't the punishment itself, it was the terrifying prelude to it. Now, let's talk about the physical space itself. When we hear the word dungeon, our minds often conjure a very specific image. A deep, dark cellar filled with skeletons and rats, directly beneath a castle's main hall. And while these oubliettes from the French word to forget did exist, they were the most extreme and rarest form. More commonly, a dungeon was simply a secure, reinforced room. It could be in the basement of the castle's main keep, where the thick stone walls muffled all sound from the world above. It could be in the towers of the main gatehouse, where prisoners could hear the sounds of daily life, the clatter of carts, the chatter of merchants just outside the walls, a constant, torturous reminder of the freedom they had lost. Sometimes, it was little more than a fortified storeroom or a cellar that was no longer needed. There was no single design. The only common elements were security and deprivation. As we imagine ourselves approaching one, feel the air grow colder, heavier. The smell changes. From the wood smoke and baked bread of the castle kitchens to the damp, musty scent of wet stone, mold, and something else. Something like old, quiet despair. The silence here is different. It's not peaceful. It's a thick, heavy blanket, broken only by the rhythmic, maddening drip. Drip. Drip of water seeping through the ancient stone. And now, picture this. The trial is over, or perhaps there was no trial at all. Two guards, their hands rough on your arms, half drag you down a winding stone staircase. The torchlight casts long, dancing shadows that seem to mock you. The air grows colder with every step. They stop before a heavy wooden door, reinforced with thick iron straps. A key, large and rusted, scrapes in the lock. The sound is deafening in the silence. The door groans open, revealing not a room, but a void. A square of absolute blackness. There's a rough shove from behind, and you stumble forward, your feet finding uneven, cold stone, and then the sound that will define your world from this moment on, the deep, resonant thud of the door closing, followed by the heavy, final sound of the bolt sliding into place. The last sliver of torchlight is gone. You are plunged into a darkness so complete it feels like a physical weight. The air is still and cold. The world you knew, the sky, the sun, the faces of people you love, it's all gone. There is only you and the darkness. This is where our story truly begins. The sound of the bolt sliding home is the last clear, sharp thing you will hear for a long time. It's a sound of absolute finality, a punctuation mark at the end of your freedom. What follows is a silence so profound it seems to have its own sound, a low hum in your ears as your senses struggle to comprehend the void. And then there is the darkness. It is not the gentle dark of a moonless night, soft and filled with the familiar shapes of trees against a starry sky, nor is it the comforting darkness of a bedroom when you close your eyes to sleep. This is a different entity altogether. It is an ancient, primal darkness, a solid thing that presses in on you from all sides. You raise a hand in front of your face, an inch from your nose, but you see nothing. It's as if you don't have a hand anymore. You are bodiless, a consciousness floating in an endless black ocean. Your eyes strain, searching for any hint of light, a crack under the door, a loose stone in the ceiling, but there is nothing. They ache with the effort, watering, trying to create light where none exists. After a time, you give up, and you realize that your eyes are useless here. You are as good as blind. This realization brings with it the first wave of true panic, a cold knot tightening in your stomach. It's a primal fear, the fear of a child lost in the woods at night, the fear of the unseen. You try to control your breathing, to slow the frantic beating of your heart that now thunders in your ears, the only proof that you are still alive. And then the cold begins its work. It's not a bracing, wintry cold. It's a damp, seeping chill that seems to emanate from the very stones themselves. It works its way through the thin fabric of your clothes as if they were not there. You feel it first on your skin, a clammy touch that raises goosebumps. But it doesn't stop there. It sinks deeper into your muscles, making them feel stiff and heavy, and then deeper still, until it feels like it has reached your very bones, a deep, resonant ache that settles in your joints. You might try to huddle, to wrap your arms around yourself, to preserve what little body heat you have left. You might try to pace, to generate some warmth through movement. But in the total darkness, you are terrified of stumbling, of falling, of cracking your head on a stone wall you cannot see. So you stand still. Or perhaps you slide down the wall until you are sitting on the frigid, uneven floor, the cold seeping into you now from below, relentless and inescapable. The floor is not smooth. It is a jumble of rough-hewn rock, dirt, and something damp and slimy. You can feel the grit and grime through your trousers. Every small shift in position is a gamble. Is that just mud? Or is it something worse? The cold is a constant companion, a physical presence in the cell with you. It robs you of your strength, drains your will. It makes sleep a dangerous prospect. To fall asleep is to risk letting your body's core temperature drop too low, to slip into a stupor from which you might not wake. So you fight it, forcing yourself to stay awake, shivering in the blackness, while the cold, methodically, patiently, works to claim you. In these first hours, time loses all meaning. Is it night? Is it day? Has an hour passed? Or a lifetime? The only markers are the internal rhythms of your own body, the frantic pulse of fear, the slow gnawing of hunger in your belly, the deep, persistent ache of the cold in your bones. Your other senses, now freed from the dominance of sight, begin to awaken, hypersensitive. You become aware of the air itself. It is thick, stagnant, and heavy with the smell of damp earth, of mold, and of human misery. There is a faint, acrid tang of ammonia from the waste of previous occupants, a smell that clings to the back of your throat. You start to hear things, or you think you do. The impossibly slow, rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the darkness. It's a sound that you might welcome at first, a break in the suffocating silence. But soon, it becomes a form of torture. Each drop lands with an echoing splash, marking a passage of time that you cannot measure, a steady beat counting down to nothing. You hear the scuttling of tiny feet nearby, the rats and other unseen creatures that share this space with you. Are they afraid of you? Or are they waiting? Your mind, starved of stimulus, begins to play tricks on you. You hear whispers in the silence, see fleeting shapes in the perfect blackness. The line between reality and hallucination begins to blur. This is the first test. It is not a test of physical strength, but of mental fortitude. It is a process of unmaking, of stripping away everything you were in the world above, leaving you with nothing but the core of your being, alone, in the cold and the dark. As hours bleed into what you can only assume are days, your sense of smell, once a background player in your life, becomes a primary source of information, a brutal narrator of your reality. The initial scent of damp stone and mold doesn't fade. It intensifies, becoming the very air you breathe. It's a thick, cloying smell, the ancient breath of the earth itself, heavy with the decay of centuries. But layered within it are sharper, more disgusting odors. There is the unmistakable, pungent stench of human waste. In the corner of your cell, there is likely a simple bucket, or perhaps just a designated spot on the floor that serves as the latrine. It is rarely emptied. This foul odor becomes a constant, inescapable presence, a humiliating reminder of your own base humanity. It mixes with the sour smell of unwashed bodies, of sweat born from fear and fever. Sometimes, a new smell will waft through the cracks in the door, the smell of stale bread or thin, watery gruel. It is the smell of survival, and it triggers a desperate, animalistic hunger that gnaws at your insides. And the sounds. The silence you first experienced was a lie. You now realize the dungeon is alive with its own terrible symphony. The dripping water you noticed before is no longer just a sound, it's a clock. Each drop a tiny, echoing hammer marking the slow, agonizing passage of time. You learn its rhythm, its tempo. You can tell by the sound if the drip is slowing or quickening. It becomes the soundtrack to your thoughts, a maddeningly consistent beat in a world of chaos. Then there are the sounds of your unseen neighbors. The rats are a constant. You hear their claws scratching on the stone, their high-pitched squeaks as they fight over scraps of unimaginable filth. They are bold, and in the darkness, you feel their presence not just with your ears, but as a prickling on your skin, the terrifying possibility of their touch. And you hear the other prisoners. From a nearby cell, you might hear a low, constant moaning, a sound of pure misery that goes on for hours until it fades into a gurgle and then silence. From another direction, you might hear frantic, desperate prayers whispered to a God who seems very far away. Sometimes there are screams, sharp, sudden, and full of a pain so profound you can feel it in your own teeth. They come from the interrogation rooms, the torture chambers, and they serve as a chilling reminder of what could still await you. The only human sounds that offer any connection to the world above are the footsteps of the guards. You learn to distinguish their heavy, booted tread on the stone floors outside. Their approach means something is about to happen, perhaps the meager ration of food, perhaps a visitor, or perhaps it is your turn to face the questioners. Every sound, from the faintest whisper to the loudest scream, is a piece of a horrifying puzzle you must assemble in the dark. You are almost certainly not alone in this misery. Unless you are a prisoner of extreme importance, kept in solitary confinement. Your cell is likely crowded. These companions in suffering are a cross-section of medieval society, stripped of their former status. A once proud knight, captured in battle, might be chained next to a common thief. A merchant who fell into debt might share his meager floor space with a political dissident who spoke out against the king. The darkness is a great equalizer, but only to a point. Very quickly, a new, brutal hierarchy forms within the confines of the cell, a microcosm of the violent world outside. Strength, not birthright, is the new currency. The strongest, most ruthless prisoner will often become the unofficial leader. He will claim the best spot, the one furthest from the latrine bucket, the one that might catch a faint draft of fresher air. He will take the largest share of the food, snatching bread from weaker hands without a second thought. Survival depends on navigating this treacherous new social landscape. You learn to make yourself small, to be unnoticeable. You learn who to avoid, whose gaze to never meet. Alliances are formed, but they are fragile, built on shared desperation, and easily broken by the promise of an extra crust of bread. Conversations are rare and whispered. Trust is a luxury no one can afford. Sharing your story, the details of your crime or your innocence, is a dangerous gamble. Any information could be used against you, traded to a guard for a small favor. Yet, despite the brutality, moments of shared humanity can flicker in the darkness. A whispered word of comfort, the sharing of a small piece of stolen food, a collective holding of breath when the guards approach. You are trapped with these strangers, your fates intertwined. They are your rivals for survival. But they are also the only other human beings who understand the hell you are enduring. They are the only ones who can confirm through their breathing, their rustling, their occasional groans, that you have not yet gone completely mad. You are not just fighting the cold and the hunger. You are navigating a complex and dangerous society, a pack of desperate animals trapped in a stone box, where the slightest misstep could be your last. In the endless twilight of the dungeon, the primal, gnawing ache of hunger becomes a central character in your story. It is a constant, dull pain in the pit of your stomach that sharpens into a ferocious beast whenever the faint scent of food drifts from the world above. The meals, when they come, are not meant for nourishment. They are a calculated measure of survival, just enough to keep you from the release of starvation. Once a day, perhaps, you hear the rattle of the guard's keys, and a small slot at the bottom of the door might open. A wooden bowl is pushed through, its contents barely visible in the gloom. Most often, it contains a thin, watery gruel, perhaps made from oats or barley, tasteless and gray. It is lukewarm at best, and often stone cold, with a consistency that is neither liquid nor solid. There is no spoon. You lift the rough-hewn bowl to your lips and drink it down, trying not to think about what else might have been in that bowl before you. Accompanying the gruel is the cornerstone of the dungeon diet bread. But this is not the warm, crusty loaf you remember from your village baker. This is dungeon bread, a dense, dark, and often stale brick of rye or barley flour. It can be hard as a rock, forcing you to soak it in your gruel or gnaw on it for an hour, your teeth aching with the effort. Sometimes it is riddled with mold, the bitter taste catching in your throat, but you eat it anyway, because it is all you have. The hunger is so profound that these meager offerings feel like a feast. You devour them in moments, licking the bowl clean, your fingers searching for any stray crumb. The moment the meal is over, the hunger returns, a hollow echo in your gut, and the long wait for the next day's ration begins. Water is an even more pressing concern. A bucket of it might be left in the corner of the cell, intended to last for days among all the prisoners. By the second day, it is no longer water. It is a stagnant, murky soup, coated with a film of dust and grime, and very likely contaminated with the filth of the cell. You know it is dangerous. You can smell the sickness in it, but the thirst is a torment that rivals hunger. Your throat feels like sandpaper, your tongue thick and swollen in your mouth. So you drink. You cup your hands and scoop up the foul liquid, trying to ignore the taste, the sliminess, the knowledge that with every swallow you could be inviting disease into your already weakened body. For the privileged few, a nobleman held for ransom, for example, conditions might be slightly better. They might pay the jailer for a cleaner bucket of water, a piece of cheese, or a flask of ale. But for the common prisoner, the food and water are just another instrument of their slow, methodical unmaking, a constant battle between the agony of want and the terror of what satisfying it might cost. The wretched diet and contaminated water create the perfect breeding ground for your most dangerous enemies, ones you cannot see or fight, disease and vermin. The lack of sanitation turns the dungeon into a petri dish, with no way to wash, no clean air, and human waste festering in the corners. Sickness is not a risk, it's an inevitability. The most feared affliction is known as jail fever, what we would now recognize as typhus. It is spread by the lice and fleas that thrive in the filthy straw and unwashed clothes of the prisoners. The fever comes on suddenly, a burning heat that racks your body, followed by a violent delirium, a splitting headache, and a spotted rash. In the darkness, you can only lie there, shivering and sweating, your mind lost in nightmarish visions, while the disease runs its course. There is no medicine, no comfort. Your cellmates might edge away from you, their fear palpable in the darkness. For most, jail fever is a death sentence. Dysentery is another constant companion, a brutal sickness of the gut born from the foul water and spoiled food. It leaves its victims weak, dehydrated, and in a state of constant humiliating agony. Even a common cold can be fatal here, quickly turning into a lung infection in the damp, chilled air. The guards offer no sympathy. A sick prisoner is simply a body waiting to be dragged out. And then there are the vermin, the rats, which you first heard as a distant scuttling, become audacious. They are your constant, unwelcome cellmates. They grow fat on the filth and are unafraid of the prisoners, seeing you not as a threat, but as another source of potential food. They scurry over your legs as you try to sleep, their claws like tiny needles on your skin. They are a physical violation and a psychological one, a constant creeping reminder of the decay and rot that surrounds you. They are also carriers of the plague, a fear that hangs over the medieval world like a shroud. Alongside the rats are the lesser torments, the lice that infest your hair and clothes, causing an incessant, maddening itch that you scratch until your skin is raw, the fleas whose bites leave angry red welts, and the spiders that spin their webs in the dark corners. Their silent presence, another layer of the dungeon's oppressive atmosphere. These invisible enemies work alongside the cold, the darkness, and the hunger. They are a relentless army, breaking down your body's defenses, preying on your despair, and ensuring that even if you avoid the executioner's axe, you might not leave the dungeon alive. Beyond the containment of the stone walls themselves, your body is often subjected to a more intimate and constant form of imprisonment, the cold, hard weight of iron. Shackles and chains are not reserved for the most dangerous prisoners. They are a standard tool of control, a physical manifestation of your captive state. The moment you are thrown into the cell, a guard might roughly grab your ankle and lock on a heavy iron cuff. It is cold to the touch, and its weight is a shock. A short, thick chain connects it to a large iron ring set into the stone floor or wall. The length of this chain now defines your entire world. It dictates how far you can walk, perhaps only a few steps in any direction. It dictates whether you can stand up fully or are forced into a perpetual crouch. It dictates whether you can reach the latrine bucket or the water source. This chain becomes a part of you. Every movement you make is accompanied by the dull, metallic clank of the links. It is a sound you come to know intimately, a sound that announces your every small action to the guards and your fellow prisoners. At night, as you try to find a comfortable position on the hard floor, the chain is a constant, unyielding presence. It gets tangled, it presses into your flesh, and the iron cuff chafes your skin raw around your ankle or wrist. The skin breaks, it bleeds, and in the filthy environment, infection is almost certain. The wound becomes a source of constant, throbbing pain, another layer of misery to endure. Sometimes more complex restraints are used. Manacles might bind your wrists together, making even the simplest act of eating a clumsy, difficult struggle. A caul or iron collar might be locked around your neck, a symbol of ultimate subjugation, like an animal on a leash. These restraints are not just for security. They are a powerful psychological weapon. They are a constant physical reminder of your powerlessness. The weight on your limbs is a metaphor for the weight on your spirit. The sound of the chains becomes the rhythm of your despair. You see other prisoners in heavier bonds. Perhaps a man accused of murder is chained by his neck, wrists, and ankles, unable to move more than a few inches. This sight serves as a warning and a source of grim comparison. You might be suffering, but it could always be worse. The chains are a tool to break your will, to make escape seem not just impossible, but unthinkable. They aim to reduce you from a thinking person to a tethered creature, whose existence is defined not by your own choices, but by the length of a few iron links. Over time, you almost forget what it feels like to walk freely, to stretch your arms, to move without the clank and drag of iron. The chains become a part of your body, and their removal, if that day ever comes, feels less like freedom and more like a strange and unsettling amputation. Of all the torments the dungeon inflicts, perhaps the most insidious is what it does to your mind. Humans are creatures of rhythm, of sunrise and sunset, of seasons and cycles. The dungeon strips all of that away. In the absolute and unchanging darkness, time liquefies. It loses all shape and meaning. The first few days, you might try to keep track. You count the deliveries of food, one bowl of gruel. One day passed, but soon, your own fatigue and the sheer monotony blur the count. Did the guard come today? Or was that yesterday? Are you remembering a meal? Or dreaming of one without the sun? Your body's natural rhythms dissolve into chaos. You sleep in short, fitful bursts, waking up with no idea if you've been asleep for minutes or hours. Wakefulness is a long, gray fog of half-thoughts and anxieties. This timeless state is a form of torture all its own. Your mind, starved of any new information or sensory input, begins to turn inward. You retreat into your own memories, replaying scenes from your life over and over again. You see the faces of your loved ones, hear their voices, remember the taste of a home-cooked meal, the feeling of sunshine on your skin. At first, these memories are a comfort, a secret refuge, but over time, they too become a source of pain. They are a constant, brutal reminder of everything you have lost. The vibrant colors of the past stand in stark contrast to the featureless black of your present. The gap between what was and what is becomes an impossible chasm of despair. To stave off madness, prisoners resort to desperate measures. You might create routines. You could pace the length of your chain, back and forth, 1,000 times. You could do exercises, pushing against the unyielding stone wall until your muscles burn. You might talk to yourself, whispering stories, reciting prayers, listing the names of everyone you have ever known, just to hear the sound of a voice, even if it is your own. You might try to engage with your cellmates, but as discussed, that is fraught with its own dangers. The greatest battle you fight is not against the guards or the rats, but against the encroaching emptiness in your own head. It is a fight against apathy, the desire to simply lie down and let the darkness consume you. It is a struggle to hold onto the thread of your own identity, to remember that you are a person, not just a thing in a cage. In the dungeon, your body is imprisoned by stone and iron, but your mind is imprisoned by an endless, silent, timeless void. In a world stripped of all means of self-expression, where your voice is swallowed by the silence and your identity is eroded by the endless darkness, the desperate human need to leave a mark, to say, "I was here," finds a way. The stone walls of the dungeon, cold and indifferent, become the final canvas for the condemned. This is the world of dungeon graffiti, a practice as old as imprisonment itself. It is a slow, laborious act. There is no ink, no paper. Your tools are a sharp rock, a piece of bone from a previous meal, or perhaps a rusty nail pried loose from the door. In the near total darkness, you work by feel, your fingers tracing the lines. You painstakingly carve into the stone. Each letter, each symbol, is an act of defiance against the oblivion that awaits you. What did these ghostly scribes write? The messages they left behind are hauntingly human. The most common carving is simply a name. Thomas, Giles, Eleanor. It is a fundamental assertion of self, a refusal to be just another nameless, forgotten soul. It's a declaration against the dungeon's attempt to erase you. Alongside the names, you often find dates. Carving the date, as best as you can reckon it, is an attempt to impose order on the timeless chaos, to anchor your suffering to a specific point in history. It is a way to tell yourself, and anyone who might see it later, that your time here was real. It was measured, it happened. Religious symbols are everywhere. The simple cross is carved countless times. A symbol of hope, a plea for divine mercy, or perhaps a sign of resignation to one's fate. You might see the IHS monogram for Jesus, or the M for Mary, Queen of Heaven. These carvings are prayers made solid, a conversation with God conducted in stone when all other forms of worship have been stripped away. There are also more complex images. A rough-hewn coat of arms, a prisoner of noble birth desperately clinging to the memory of their former status. A crude drawing of a ship, a symbol of freedom and escape. A heart, a timeless and universal symbol of the love they left behind in the world above. These images are windows into the minds of the imprisoned, revealing their deepest longings and fears. In some rare cases, you find longer messages, short poems, or bitter complaints against injustice. The more they torment me, the more I will believe. One prisoner carved in the Tower of London. It is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a voice of defiance echoing down through the centuries. These carvings are more than just scratches on a wall. They are the last will and testament of the forgotten. They are the final, desperate act of communication from people who were systematically silenced. In the oppressive gloom of the dungeon, they are tiny, flickering sparks of humanity that could not be extinguished. In this isolated world of stone and shadow, there is one figure who bridges the gap between your wretched existence and the life that continues outside the jailer, or the guard. He's not a professional, uniformed officer in the modern sense. He is likely a common man-at-arms, a low-ranking soldier assigned the grim, thankless task of watching over the dungeons. He's your gatekeeper, your provider, and potentially your tormentor. Your entire existence depends on this man. He is the one who brings your daily ration of bread and water. His mood, his whim, can determine the quality of your survival. A kind jailer, a rarity, to be sure, might bring a slightly larger piece of bread, or a bucket of water that is marginally cleaner. He might answer a question, telling you if it is day or night. This small act of kindness, this brief moment of human connection, can feel like a ray of sunshine in the endless dark. More often, the jailer is indifferent or cruel. Your suffering is not his concern, it is simply part of his job. He might be brutal, kicking the food bowl into the cell, taking sadistic pleasure in your degradation. He might mock you, telling you false news of the outside world, dangling hope only to snatch it away. He is also the gatekeeper to any small comfort you might obtain. If you are a prisoner with money or connections, the jailer is the man you bribe. A few coins, smuggled in by a family member, could buy you a candle for an hour, a blanket against the cold, or a flask of wine to dull the misery. This creates a corrupt and dangerous economy. The jailer holds all the power, and he knows it. He can provide, but he can also take away. He can be your source of information, but he can also be a spy, listening at the door for any word that he can report to his superiors in exchange for a reward. Your relationship with this man is one of absolute and terrifying dependency. You learn to listen for the sound of his specific footsteps. You learn to read his tone of voice. His presence is a break in the monotony, but it is a break filled with anxiety and uncertainty. He is the embodiment of the arbitrary power that has imprisoned you. He is a constant reminder that you are not in control of your own life, that even your most basic needs for food, for water, for a single kind word are subject to the whims of another man. He is your only link to the human race, and yet, he is also the symbol of your complete and utter subjugation. The dungeon is a place of passive suffering, where cold and hunger and darkness slowly grind you down. But for some, there is another place, a place of active, unimaginable pain. This is the torture chamber. It is not always a separate room. Sometimes the tools are brought directly to your cell, their shadows dancing on the wall in the flickering torchlight. Or you are dragged from your cell, your heart pounding with a new kind of terror, and taken to a room where the air smells different, not of mold and despair, but of sweat, blood, and fear. The purpose of this room is not punishment. Punishment is public, for all to see. The purpose of the torture chamber is to obtain something, a confession. In a legal system that often valued a confession above all other evidence, forcing one from a prisoner was a standard, accepted practice. It didn't matter if the confession was true. It only mattered that it was given. The man who presides over this room is not the jailer. He is the interrogator, or the torturer, a specialist in the grim science of human pain. He may approach you calmly, speaking in a reasonable tone. He is offering you a choice: confess now, and the pain will not be necessary. But you know this is a lie. The choice is not between pain and no pain. It is between the pain of the tools and the pain of a false confession that will lead you to the executioner's block. The tools themselves are terrifying in their mechanical simplicity. You might be shown the rack, a simple wooden frame with rollers at each end. Your wrists are tied to one end, your ankles to the other. As the interrogator turns a handle, the rollers slowly, inexorably pull your body in opposite directions. You feel your ligaments stretch, your joints pop and separate. The pain is blinding, all-consuming. Every muscle in your body screams. The interrogator asks his questions calmly, his voice a drone beneath your own agonized cries. Or perhaps they use the strappado. Your hands are tied behind your back, and the rope is looped over a pulley in the ceiling. You are hoisted into the air, your full body weight hanging from your wrists, dislocating your shoulders with a sickening crack. They might drop you, stopping you just before you hit the floor. The jolt sending waves of agony through your entire body, and there are other, simpler tools. Thumb screws that slowly crush your fingers, the boot, a vise that splinters the bones in your leg and foot, branding irons that hiss against flesh. The goal of the torturer is not to kill you. A dead man cannot confess. The goal is to take you to the very edge of death, to a place where pain blots out all thought, all reason, all truth, until the only thing left in the universe is the desire for it to stop. And to make it stop, you will say anything. You will confess to stealing, to heresy, to treason. You will name accomplices you have never met. You will agree to a story that they have written for you. And once they have their confession, the pain stops. They carry your broken body back to the darkness of your cell, where the quiet, throbbing agony of your injuries replaces the sharp, blinding pain of the chamber. You have survived, but you have also sealed your own fate. While the majority of prisoners were men, women were by no means strangers to the dungeon's cold embrace. For them, however, this subterranean world held a unique and compounded terror. The crimes that led them here were often different, rooted in the specific social and religious anxieties of the era. A woman who was too independent, who understood herbal remedies, or who simply had an outspoken nature, might find herself accused of witchcraft, a charge fueled by fear and superstition. Adultery, a crime that often went unpunished for men, could mean a death sentence for a woman. Even lesser crimes, like being a common scold or gossiping, could lead to a short, sharp stay in a local lockup as a means of public humiliation. Once imprisoned, a woman faced all the same horrors as her male counterparts: the darkness, the filth, the disease, the hunger. But layered on top of this was the constant, terrifying threat of sexual violence. She was utterly at the mercy of the male guards and, if housed with other prisoners, the men who shared her cell. The same patriarchal power structure that existed in the world above was replicated and magnified in the lawless dark of the dungeon. A woman's body was often seen as just another commodity, something to be used by those in power. Her survival often depended on a grim calculation, submitting to the advances of a jailer in exchange for a crust of bread, a drink of clean water, or simple protection from the others. Pregnancy and childbirth in such conditions were tantamount to a death sentence for both mother and child. There was no medical care, no sanitation, no comfort. The darkness and despair of the dungeon were a horrifying backdrop for one of life's most vulnerable moments. For a woman, the dungeon was not just a place of physical confinement. It was a place where her identity as a woman made her a target, compounding her suffering in ways the men around her could never fully comprehend. It was a place where the loss of freedom was accompanied by the constant, imminent threat of losing the ownership of her own body. Not all prisoners were treated equally. While a common thief was thrown into a crowded, filthy pit, a captured nobleman or a high-ranking political prisoner might experience a very different form of confinement. This was the world of the noble prisoner. Their imprisonment was often less about punishment and more about politics and profit. A captured enemy knight was a valuable asset, a pawn to be ransomed back to his family or king for a hefty sum. A disgraced courtier might be held in comfortable confinement to keep him from spreading dangerous secrets. Their dungeon might not be a dungeon at all in the traditional sense. It could be a secure, sparsely furnished room high up in a castle tower. Compared to the hell below, this was a life of relative luxury. The noble prisoner might be allowed his own bed, decent food brought from the castle kitchens, wine to drink, and even books to read or letters to write. He would be kept in solitary confinement, not as a punishment, but to protect him as a valuable asset. He would not be subjected to the filth, the disease, or the vermin that plagued the common prisoners. He might even be allowed visitors or a servant to attend to his needs. But this gilded cage had its own unique psychological torments. For a nobleman, status and honor were everything. To be imprisoned, even in comfort, was a profound humiliation. It was a fall from grace that stripped him of his power and identity. The silence of his comfortable room could be just as maddening as the chaotic noise of the pit below. He was isolated, cut off from the world of politics and power that had defined his life. He was a pawn in a game he could no longer control, his fate being decided in courts and chambers far away. The waiting was a torture in itself. Would his family pay the ransom? Would his king negotiate his release? Or would a shift in political winds mean he was no longer useful alive, destined for a quiet, secret execution? The noble prisoner was spared the physical agonies of the dungeon, but he endured a unique mental anguish, the torment of a man who has fallen from a great height and can do nothing but wait in silent, comfortable despair. In the depths of despair, the human mind naturally turns to one single, sustaining thought escape: The dream of it is a flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness. You might spend countless hours exploring your confinement by touch, your fingers tracing every inch of the stone walls, searching for a loose block, a crack, a weakness. You might examine the heavy oak door, testing its strength, probing the lock with a stolen piece of bone, hoping for a miracle. This fantasy of freedom becomes your secret project, the one thing that gives your days a sense of purpose. You might plot, you might plan, you might even whisper with a trusted cellmate about overpowering a guard, stealing a key, and making a run for it. However, the grim reality is that for the vast majority of prisoners, escape was not just improbable, it was a fantasy. The very architecture of the dungeon was designed to crush this hope. The walls were immensely thick, often several feet of solid stone, impossible to dig through with bare hands or primitive tools. The doors were made of solid wood, reinforced with iron, and fitted with complex locks for which only the head jailer had the key. If your cell had a window, it was little more than a narrow slit high up on the wall, too small for a person to fit through and barred with thick iron. Even if you could somehow bypass these physical barriers, you were in a weakened state. Starvation, thirst, and illness would have sapped your strength. Your muscles would have atrophied from lack of use. You would be no match for a well-fed, armed guard. And where would you run? The dungeon was typically located in the most secure part of a castle or gatehouse. Beyond your cell door lay a labyrinth of corridors, more locked doors, and patrols of soldiers. The odds were not just against you, they were astronomical. The stories of successful escapes that have come down to us are famous precisely because they were so exceptionally rare. For almost every prisoner, the dream of escape was just that, a dream. It was a mental coping mechanism, a way to endure the unendurable. But with each passing day, the candle of that hope would flicker and dim, as the cold, hard reality of the stone walls and iron bars asserted its absolute, inescapable authority. The stories we have been telling are not mere fiction. They are a composite of countless real lives and real places. History is littered with the names of dungeons that became synonymous with terror and despair. The Tower of London is perhaps the most famous. A fortress that served as a royal palace, a treasury, and, most chillingly, a prison for high-profile enemies of the state. For centuries, its stone walls held queens, dukes, and rebels, many of whom left their mark in the form of graffiti that can still be seen today, ghostly whispers of their fear and faith. In France, the conciergerie in Paris was known as the antechamber to the guillotine during the French Revolution, its cells overflowing with those condemned by the new republic. Across Europe, nearly every castle had its own pit, its own tower, its own place for the forgotten. The conditions within these places were universally horrific. Yet, out of this suffering emerged stories of incredible endurance. Consider the fate of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century. This powerful and wealthy military order was arrested en masse on orders from King Philip IV of France, who coveted their riches. Accused of heresy and blasphemy, knights across France were thrown into dungeons and subjected to brutal interrogation. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, an elderly and respected warrior, was tortured repeatedly by royal inquisitors. He and his men were subjected to tortures like the strappado, where their shoulders were wrenched from their sockets, all to extract false confessions. The psychological and physical torment they endured exemplifies the dungeon's role not just as a prison, but as a factory for producing truth that served the state. De Molay's story ending in his being burned at the stake after recanting his forced confession, illustrates the grim path many prisoners walked from a cell to the torture chamber, and finally to the executioner. These historical accounts anchor the abstract horror in reality. They remind us that the unseen, unnamed prisoner we have been imagining was real. They had names, families, and stories that were brutally silenced by stone, iron, and the unyielding will of those in power. Beyond the immediate, tangible horrors of your cell, the cold, the vermin, the suffocating darkness, there exists a more subtle, yet profoundly cruel, form of torture. It is the torture of sound, the auditory ghosts of a world that you can no longer see or touch. If your cell is located in a gatehouse tower or high within the castle walls, you are not blessed with total silence. Instead, you are cursed with a filtered, distorted symphony of life carrying on without you. At first, these sounds might seem like a connection, a comfort, a reminder that the world still exists. But soon, they become a source of exquisite pain, each one a tiny dagger twisting in the wound of your confinement. In the early morning, you might hear the distant, muffled crowing of a rooster. It is a sound that once meant the simple start of a new day, a call to work in the fields or the workshop. Now, it is a marker of a sunrise you cannot see, a day you will not live. It measures the time you are losing, each crow a reminder of another dawn stolen from you. You lie on the cold stone floor and try to picture it, the sky turning from inky black to a soft, pearly gray, then flushing with the first colors of pink and orange. The memory is so vivid, so beautiful, and its inaccessibility is a physical ache. Later in the day, other sounds drift in. You might hear the faint, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer from the village below. It is a sound of purpose, of creation, of a man shaping hot iron into something useful, earning his bread, living his life. You can almost smell the coal smoke and feel the heat of the forge. The sound is so normal, so mundane, and yet for you, it represents an entire universe of activity and freedom that is now utterly alien. You hear the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestones, the shouts of merchants hawking their wares in the marketplace. You can almost distinguish the words, the bartering, the haggling, the pulse of commerce and community. You hear the laughter of children playing a game in the castle bailey, their high-pitched squeals of joy, a sound so pure and so distant from your reality that it feels like it's from another world. This laughter doesn't warm you. It chills you to the bone with the force of what you've lost, the simple, unthinking happiness of a child in the sun. Perhaps the most torturous sounds of all are those of celebration. A distant peal of church bells might signal a wedding. You lie in the dark and imagine the bride, the groom, the feast, the dancing. The sound of a minstrel's lute or the joyous drone of a bagpipe might drift up from the great hall during a festival. You can picture the roaring fire, the tables laden with food, the flowing wine, the camaraderie. These sounds of joy and community are the most profound reminders of your isolation. They highlight not just your physical imprisonment, but your social death. You have been excised from the book of the living. While others love and laugh and celebrate, you are here forgotten, slowly turning to stone in the dark. The sounds of the world above are not a window. They are a mirror, reflecting back at you the emptiness of your own existence. They are a constant, unending sermon on the theme of your loss, ensuring that even in the silence of your cell, you are never truly at peace. In an age defined by faith, where the promise of heaven and the terror of hell were as real as the stone walls around you, the state of your soul was a concern that often outweighed the state of your body. Yet, the dungeon was a place that seemed to exist outside of God's grace, a pocket of earthly purgatory. The role of the church and its clergy in this environment was complex and often contradictory. For most common prisoners, left to rot in the squalor of a crowded cell, a visit from a priest was an almost unheard of luxury. The institutional church, for all its power, rarely extended its hand into the deepest, darkest corners of the secular legal system. The day-to-day spiritual survival of a prisoner was left entirely up to them. It was a faith stripped bare of all its comforting rituals. There was no mass to attend, no stained glass to contemplate, no choir to lift the spirit. There was only the private, desperate landscape of your own soul. The religious symbols you saw were not on a priest's vestments, but were the ones you scratched into the wall with a trembling hand. Your prayers were not chanted in the sacred space of a cathedral, but whispered into the foul, stagnant air of your cell, a raw and direct appeal to a God who felt impossibly far away. However, for a prisoner of importance, or for one whose crime was specifically religious in nature, such as heresy, the clergy became a central and often terrifying presence. An accused heretic would not be left alone with their thoughts. They would be visited by priests and theologians. But these were not visits of comfort. They were extensions of the interrogation. The goal was not to soothe your soul, but to break your will, to force you to recant your beliefs and submit to the church's authority. These learned men would engage you in theological debates, using scripture and logic not as a source of enlightenment, but as a weapon. They would paint vivid, terrifying pictures of the eternal damnation that awaited you, the endless and fiery torments of hell that would make your current suffering seem like a pleasant afternoon. Their visits were a form of psychological warfare, designed to dismantle your convictions and leave you spiritually naked and terrified, ready to confess to anything to save your soul from a fate worse than death. For those who were condemned to die, the priest would return one last time. This final visit was the one moment where the church's role shifted from judge to reluctant comforter. The priest would hear your final confession, a confession that now held no legal weight, but was purely for the salvation of your soul. He would offer the sacrament of last rites, the final spiritual cleansing before you met your Maker. In this moment, in the flickering torchlight of your last night on earth, the priest was your only link to the promise of an afterlife. He was the ferryman of the soul. For the prisoner, this final encounter was fraught with a complex mixture of fear, relief, and perhaps even a sliver of hope. It was an acknowledgement that while the world of men had condemned your body, the world of God might still have mercy on your soul. But even this final act of faith was performed in the shadow of the gallows, a last hurried ritual before the final, brutal justice of the secular world was carried out. After an eternity spent in the timeless dark, a day arrives that is different from all the others. It begins not with a bowl of gruel, but with the sound of multiple guards, the definitive clank of the heavy door bolt being drawn back. You are hauled to your feet, your muscles screaming in protest, your joints stiff from the cold and disuse. You are dragged from your cell, not to the interrogation room, but up a winding staircase. With every step, the air changes. It loses its tomb-like chill and smells less of mold and more of rushes and wood smoke. And then, you see it. A sliver of light under a door. The guards shove the door open, and you are thrust into a world that your mind has almost forgotten. The light. It is an agony. It is a physical blow, so bright and overwhelming that you cry out, throwing your arm over your face. Your pupils, accustomed to near total blackness, shrink to pinpricks, and your head explodes with pain. For several minutes, You are effectively blind, seeing nothing but a searing white void. Slowly, painfully, shapes begin to resolve themselves out of the light. You are in a hall, perhaps the castle's great hall, a vast cavernous space. The air is warm and full of movement, but most overwhelming of all are the people. Dozens of them. Faces. So many faces. After months of seeing nothing, or only the grim visage of your jailer, the sight of a crowd of strangers is a sensory onslaught. You see their fine clothes, their clean skin, their curious and hostile stares. You are acutely, humiliatingly aware of your own appearance. Your hair is a matted, filthy tangle. Your beard is overgrown. Your clothes are rags, stiff with grime. Your body is skeletal. Your skin pale and translucent from the lack of sun. You smell of the dungeon, an aura of filth and despair that causes the people nearest to you to wrinkle their noses and edge away. You are a creature from another world, a specter of the darkness dragged into the light, and you are the focus of every eye in the room. You are pushed before a raised dais, where a man sits in a high-backed chair. He is the judge, the local lord, a magistrate, or a royal official. He looks down at you with an expression of weary disinterest. Someone begins to read the charges against you. The voice drones on, but it is hard to follow the words. Your mind is still reeling from the shock of the world. The colors seem impossibly vibrant, the sounds deafeningly loud. You feel a profound sense of dislocation, as if you're watching a play about your own life. You may be asked to speak, to offer a defense, but your voice, when it comes, is a dry, unused croak. What can you say? How can you explain the reality of your experience in a way these clean, well-fed people can understand? You look at their faces, searching for a sign of sympathy, of understanding, but you find none. They see not a person, but a symbol of crime, a piece of filth to be judged and disposed of. This brief return to the world is not a moment of hope. It is the pinnacle of your humiliation, a cruel reminder of the life you have been barred from before the inevitable verdict sends you back to the darkness, or to an even more final fate. The trial, for all its sensory shock, is often a swift affair. The outcome has, in many cases, already been decided. The verdict is delivered, a few stark words that seal your fate, echoing in the sudden silence of the great hall. Let us imagine the first possibility acquittal. It is a word you had not dared to even hope for. The charges are dismissed. You are free to go. For a moment, the word does not register. It is a foreign concept, a language you no longer speak. Free. What does that even mean? The guards unlock your manacles, the iron falling away from your wrists with a clatter. No one guides you. You are simply expected to walk away. You take a hesitant step, then another. The crowd parts before you, their faces a mixture of suspicion and morbid curiosity. You stumble towards the great doors of the hall, and for the second time that day, you are blinded by the light as you step outside into the full, unfiltered glare of the sun. The world rushes at you, the noise of the street, the smell of horses and humanity, the feeling of a breeze on your face. It is too much. You are overwhelmed, weak, disoriented. You have no money, no home to return to, and you are marked by the stink of the dungeon. Freedom is not a joyous release. It is a terrifying, bewildering new kind of wilderness. Now, let us imagine the other verdict, the one that was always more likely, guilty. The word lands like a physical blow, a confirmation of the despair that has been your constant companion. The sentence is pronounced immediately after. Perhaps it is a branding, a mutilation, a public flogging, Or perhaps it is the sentence that has haunted your every waking and sleeping moment: death. In that instant, a strange calm might descend upon you. The long, agonizing uncertainty is finally over. You now have a future, as terrible as it is. It has a shape, an endpoint. You are manhandled by the guards once more. Your brief, painful excursion into the world of light now concluded. You are dragged back down the winding stone stairs, back towards the familiar cold and the familiar smell of damp earth. The return to the dungeon after the verdict is a unique kind of psychological turning point. If you were acquitted, the dungeon is a memory that will haunt you forever, a stain on your soul. But if you were condemned, the dungeon transforms. It is no longer a place of indefinite waiting. It is now the antechamber of death, a final holding pen before the scaffold. When the heavy door slams shut this time, the sound has a different meaning. It is no longer sealing you away from life. It is sealing you in with your own mortality. The darkness that greets you feels different, heavier. It is now the darkness of the grave. You are returned to your cellmates, who can see in your eyes, even in the gloom, what has happened. A space is made for you. Your presence has changed. You are no longer just a prisoner. You are now the condemned, a dead man walking, and the final, lonely wait begins. The period between the death sentence and the execution is a unique form of torment, a time when the abstract fear of death solidifies into a concrete, day-by-day reality. You are now living on borrowed time, each drip of water in the darkness, a tick of your final clock. Your status in the grim hierarchy of the dungeon has changed. You are an object of awe, pity, and fear for the other prisoners. They might offer you a slightly larger share of their meager food, a small gesture of respect for one who is about to make the final journey. Or they might shun you, afraid that your bad luck, your proximity to death is contagious. You have become a memento mori in their midst, a living reminder of the fate that could so easily befall any of them. Your own senses become heightened and distorted. The thin gruel you are given suddenly has a distinct taste, the foul water, a specific texture. These are the last tastes you will ever know. The cold of the stone floor feels more profound, a rehearsal for the eternal cold of the grave. Your mind, which had previously been lost in a fog of timeless despair, now becomes obsessively focused. You count the passing days with a feverish intensity, marking each one with a scratch on the wall, a neat line of tally marks charting your own extinction. You live your life in reverse, your memories playing back with an agonizing clarity. You remember your childhood, the face of your mother, the feeling of running through a field on a summer's day. These memories are no longer a comfort. They are sharp, painful reminders of a world you are being irrevocably torn from. You feel a desperate, clawing need to make some final sense of your life, to find some meaning in the abrupt, violent end that awaits you. Sleep offers no escape. It is filled with nightmares, vivid rehearsals of your own execution. You see the crowd, the executioner's masked face, the glint of the axe or the shadow of the noose. You feel the rough wood of the scaffold beneath your feet. You hear the priest's hurried prayers. You experience the final, heart-stopping moment of oblivion, only to wake up, gasping. Back in the darkness of your cell, your heart hammering against your ribs, the entire ordeal yet to be lived through, for real. The approach of the guard's footsteps now carries a new and final terror. Every time the bolt is drawn, you wonder, is it time? You are caught in a state of suspended animation, trapped between a life that is already over and a death that has not yet arrived. It is a period of intense, concentrated existence, where every sensation, every thought, every memory is amplified by the stark, inescapable fact that they are the last you will ever have. The final wait is the dungeon's cruelest masterpiece, a slow, methodical dismantling of a man's spirit before his body is finally broken. For the noble prisoner, locked in his relatively comfortable tower room, the verdict was rarely a simple case of guilt or innocence. His life was not a matter of justice, but of commerce. He was an asset, a walking treasure chest, and his fate was tied to the cold, hard calculus of ransom. The waiting he endured was of a different sort, but no less agonizing. It was a wait filled with the fluctuating anxieties of the marketplace. News would arrive in trickles, pass through the jailer he bribed or a carefully worded letter from his family. The negotiations were a slow, intricate dance. His captor, the enemy lord or king, would demand an exorbitant sum, a price designed to cripple his family's finances and fund a military campaign. His family, in turn, would plead poverty, making a counteroffer that was a fraction of the demand. This process could drag on for months, even years. During this time, the noble prisoner lived in a state of limbo. His comfort was conditional. If negotiations were going well, his food might improve. He might be allowed a new book or a finer wine. If they stalled, his privileges could be revoked instantly. He might be moved to a colder room, his rations reduced to common bread and water, a sharp reminder that his gilded cage could become a true dungeon at a moment's notice. He was a commodity, and his value could rise and fall with the fortunes of war and politics. A victory for his side might make his release a priority, speeding up negotiations. A defeat might render him worthless, or worse, a political liability to be disposed of quietly. He would pace his room, a prisoner of his own wealth and status, his mind consumed with questions. Is his family doing enough? Can they afford the price? Do they even want him back? Or is his absence convenient for an ambitious younger brother? The psychological toll was immense. He was forced to contemplate his own monetary value, to see his life reduced to a figure in a ledger. This was a profound humiliation for a man of honor, whose identity was built on notions of martial prowess and noble lineage, not on the haggling of merchants. He was utterly powerless, his destiny being decided by others in rooms he could not enter. The arrival of a messenger would send his heart leaping with a mixture of hope and dread. Was it news of his freedom, or a demand for more money that his family could not possibly pay when the day of release finally came? If it came, it was not a moment of pure joy. It was a transaction. A sum was paid. The asset was delivered. As he rode away from the castle that had been his prison, he was a free man, but he was also an indebted one, his life having been bought back at a cost that would hang over his family for generations. He had survived, but his honor and his family's treasury were deeply scarred. There is perhaps no fate more terrifying than not being condemned, not being ransomed, but simply being forgotten. This was the reality for the prisoner who slipped through the cracks of the medieval system. He might have been arrested on the orders of a lord who was then killed in battle. He might have been a witness whose testimony was no longer needed. He might simply have been the victim of a clerical error, his name lost from the rolls, his existence erased from the official memory. For this prisoner, there is no trial, no verdict, no final wait. There is only the endless, unchanging procession of days in the darkness. The daily ration of bread and water continues to arrive, a mindless, bureaucratic act that keeps his body alive while his identity dissolves. His jailers change over the years. The new ones do not know his name or his crime. He is simply the prisoner in the deep cell, a part of the castle's inventory. In this profound and absolute isolation, the mind, starved of all stimulus and all hope, begins to unravel. This is the path to madness. The whispers in the silence become real voices. The fleeting shapes in the darkness become solid companions or terrifying monsters. The prisoner retreats entirely into an inner world, a fortress of delusion that is the mind's last defense against the unbearable reality of being forgotten. He might develop elaborate rituals, have long conversations with the rats, or believe himself to be a king holding court in his stone palace. This madness is not a sudden break, but a slow, creeping erosion, a merciful release from a situation that a sane mind cannot endure. To the outside world, he is gone, but in his own mind, he is somewhere else entirely. This is the true meaning of the oubliette, from the French oublier, to forget, while the romantic image is of a pit into which someone is thrown and left to starve. The reality was often this slow, living burial. The prisoner was not actively killed. He was simply allowed to cease to exist. He would live out the rest of his natural life in the darkness, his mind gone, his body slowly wasting away, until one day the guard would open the slot in the door and find the cell's inhabitant still and silent. The body would be dragged out with no ceremony, its name unknown, its story lost forever. This was the ultimate victory of the dungeon. It did not just take a man's life. It took his name, his story, his sanity, and his memory, leaving behind nothing but an empty space and the faint, lingering scent of despair, a ghost that no one would ever remember to mourn. Even when faced with absolute power and the near certainty of death, the human spirit instinctively resists. In the dungeon, where open rebellion was impossible, this resistance took on subtle, secret, and deeply personal forms. These were not grand acts of defiance, but small, flickering flames of autonomy in a world designed to extinguish them. Beyond the graffiti carved into the walls, there were other, quieter rebellions. Singing was one of them. A prisoner, deep in the night, might begin to sing a song from his home village, a ballad of heroes, or a hymn of defiance. The song would be a violation of the dungeon's oppressive silence, a thread of human warmth and memory woven into the cold, dead air. Other prisoners might listen in the darkness. The familiar tune, a reminder that they were not alone, that they shared a common culture, a world outside these walls. The guards might beat the singer for his insolence, but for a few precious moments, the song was a declaration that his voice and his spirit could not be completely silenced. Another form of rebellion was the sharing of information. Prisoners would devise ingenious ways to communicate between cells. A carefully timed cough, a series of taps on the stone walls, a message whispered through a crack in the floor. These secret conversations were a lifeline, a way to exchange news, share rumors, or simply offer a word of comfort. It was a way of creating a community, a hidden society that operated under the noses of the guards. To share information was to defy the dungeon's purpose of isolation. It was an assertion that you were still part of a collective, not just a solitary, suffering animal. It was a dangerous game if discovered. The punishment would be severe, but the reward of human connection was often worth the risk. Even the simple act of refusing to surrender to despair was a form of rebellion. To create a routine, to perform physical exercises in the cramped space, to force your mind to stay sharp by reciting poetry or solving mathematical problems in your head. All of these were acts of war against the encroaching apathy. It was a refusal to let the dungeon win. The most profound rebellion, however, was the act of compassion. To share your tiny crust of bread with a weaker prisoner, to give a drink of your water to one who was sick, to whisper a word of comfort to the man in the throes of a nightmare. These were acts that directly contradicted the brutal, survival of the fittest ethos of the dungeon. They were affirmations of a moral code that the dungeon was meant to destroy. These small, secret acts of defiance did not break down the walls or unlock the chains, but they achieved something arguably more important in a place designed to turn men into beasts. They preserved their humanity. Where there is human society, no matter how debased, there is an economy. The dungeon was no exception. It had its own complex, hidden system of commerce, a black market that operated in whispers and shadows fueled by desperation and corruption. The official currency of the outside world, gold and silver coins, was rare, but it was the ultimate prize. A prisoner with wealthy connections might be able to have coins smuggled in, hidden in a loaf of bread, or sewn into the hem of a visitor's cloak. With these coins, everything was for sale. The primary seller was always the jailer. For a coin, he could be persuaded to look the other way to provide a better meal, one with a piece of meat, perhaps, or a flask of strong ale to numb the senses, a blanket, a candle, a cleaner bucket of water, a message delivered to the outside world. Everything had its price. This system created a stark divide between the prisoners who had resources and those who had none, a perfect mirror of the society above. But for the vast majority who had no access to coin, a different, more primitive economy emerged. The currency in this market was made up of favors, information, and the few tangible goods that existed. Food was the most liquid asset. Your daily ration of bread was your income. You could eat it, of course, but you could also trade it. Half a crust of bread might buy you a story from a newcomer, information about the world outside. A full crust might persuade a stronger prisoner to offer you his protection for a day. Information itself was a valuable commodity. A prisoner who was taken for interrogation and returned would be endlessly debriefed by his cellmates. What questions were asked? Who was the interrogator? Any piece of information that could help another survive was precious and could be traded for a better sleeping spot or a share of another's water. Even skills had value. A prisoner who knew how to set a broken bone, who could sing songs, or who was a gifted storyteller could trade these skills for tangible goods. The storyteller could offer a brief escape from reality in exchange for a portion of his audience's food. The most ruthless prisoners would use debt as a weapon. They would lend food or offer protection to a weaker prisoner, creating a debt that the poor soul could never repay. The debtor would become the lender's servant, his property, forced to do his bidding, to give up his food, and to absorb punishments on his behalf. This dark economy, with its complex web of trade, debt, and power, was a brutal parody of the world above. It was a testament to the human instinct to create systems and hierarchies even in the most desperate of circumstances, a grim marketplace where the price of everything was known, and the value of a human life was terrifyingly low. For the very few who survived the ordeal and were granted release, the moment of freedom was not the joyous, triumphant event we see in stories. It was a violent, painful, and disorienting rebirth into a world that had become alien. Imagine the moment the jailer comes not with food, but with a key to your shackles. The iron falls away from your ankle, and the limb feels unnervingly light, phantom-like. You are pulled to your feet, your legs trembling and weak, barely able to support your own weight after months or years of inactivity. You are guided up the familiar stairs, but this time, you do not stop at the judgment hall. You are led directly to the main gates of the castle. The gate is opened, and you are pushed out into the daylight. The shock is absolute. The sunlight is a physical assault. a searing pain that forces you to squeeze your eyes shut. The world of sound rushes in, not the muffled echoes you were used to, but a cacophony of voices, animals, and movement that is dizzying and nauseating. When you can finally force your eyes open, the world is a blur of overwhelming color and motion. Faces swim before you, but you cannot focus. Your vision, so accustomed to judging distances in a small, dark space, cannot comprehend the vastness of an open street, the height of the buildings, the expanse of the sky. The sky itself is terrifying. Its bright, infinite emptiness is a form of agoraphobia after the comforting, solid press of the stone ceiling. You stumble forward on legs that feel like they belong to a stranger. People give you a wide berth, repulsed by your appearance. You are a skeletal figure, draped in rags, with the pale skin and haunted eyes of a ghost. You smell of death and decay. Children stare at you with a mixture of fear and fascination. The simplest things are a struggle. The act of walking on uneven ground, of navigating a crowd, of speaking to another person, these are skills you have to relearn. You have forgotten the social graces, the simple currency of a nod or a smile. You have no money, no possessions, and often no home to return to. Your family may have moved on, presumed you dead, or may have been ruined by the very circumstances that led to your imprisonment. Freedom is not a destination. It is a brutal, terrifying journey. You are an outcast, a man out of time, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that continued to turn while you were buried alive. The first day of freedom is often not a celebration, but a profound and lonely struggle to simply comprehend that the walls are gone, and that you are, against all odds, still alive. The release from the dungeon is not the end of the story. The stone walls may be behind you, but you carry the dungeon with you for the rest of your days. It lives in the scars on your body and the deeper, invisible wounds in your mind. Physically, you are a wreck. The years of malnutrition have left you with chronic ailments, a weakened constitution that makes you susceptible to every passing illness. Your joints ache with a permanent, dull throb from the constant cold and damp. Your eyesight might be permanently damaged from the long darkness, leaving you squinting and uncomfortable in bright light. The shackles may have left a permanent, ropey scar around your ankle, a physical brand of your time as a captive. Every morning when you wake, these physical pains are the first reminder of where you have been. But the psychological scars are far deeper and more debilitating. You are haunted by the memory of the darkness, the silence, the fear. You might suffer from terrifying nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, convinced you are back in the cell. You might be prone to sudden fits of panic in enclosed spaces, or feel a deep, irrational anxiety in large crowds. The constant hunger you endured may have created a lifelong obsession with food, an inability to ever feel truly secure that you will not starve again. The world, which once felt safe and familiar, now seems filled with potential threats. You are distrustful of authority, suspicious of strangers. The easy trust you once had in your fellow man has been shattered, replaced by the cynical, watchful paranoia you learned in the cell. You are a stranger to those you once loved. You have seen a side of humanity, a depth of suffering, that they cannot possibly comprehend. There is a gulf between your experience and theirs that can never be bridged by words. They might see you as moody, silent, or prone to sudden rages. They do not understand that the silence is a retreat to the familiar quiet of the cell, that the rage is born from a profound and helpless sense of injustice. The dungeon has taken your past and poisoned your future. You may be free, but you are not whole. A part of you, the part that laughed easily and trusted freely, died in that cold, dark cell. You survived, but the dungeon's victory is that it never truly lets you go. It remains your constant companion, a silent, shadowy cell that you carry within your own mind until your dying day. It is a mistake to think that all dungeons were created equal, just as a vast gulf separated the life of a peasant from that of a king. So too did a hierarchy of suffering exist within the world of medieval prisons. The stone walls you found yourself between were a direct reflection of your perceived worth, or lack thereof, to the world above. The common thief, the runaway serf, or the drunken brawler was destined for the most wretched of places, the common pit. This was often little more than a cellar or a reinforced basement, where the principle of containment was simply to cram as many bodies as possible into a single, squalid space. Here, there was no privacy, no separation. You were thrown into a writhing mass of humanity, a chaotic society of the desperate, where the strongest ruled through brute force, and the weak were trampled underfoot. The air was thick with the combined stench of dozens of unwashed bodies and a single, overflowing latrine bucket. Disease spread like wildfire in these packed conditions, and survival was a daily, vicious competition for a scrap of bread or a mouthful of air. This was the bottom rung of the ladder, a place where humanity was stripped down to its most basic, animalistic instincts. Slightly above this was the dedicated cell, the type we have largely been imagining. It might be located in a gatehouse tower or along a castle corridor. Here, you might be alone or with only a few other prisoners. You were still subject to the cold, the darkness, and the despair, but you were spared the constant, violent struggle of the common pit. Your confinement was more ordered, your ration of food more likely to reach you, your existence acknowledged by the guards as an individual rather than as part of an anonymous mass. This was the typical fate for a prisoner of some minor note, a political dissident, a merchant who had defaulted on a significant loan, or a soldier captured in a skirmish. Your imprisonment was still a torment, but it was a lonely, quiet one, a battle fought primarily within the confines of your own mind rather than against the desperate fists and feet of your fellow captives. At the apex of this grim pyramid was the noble's confinement, which was often a prison in name only. A captured duke or a politically inconvenient queen would be held in what was known as custody rather than imprisonment. Their cell might be a fully furnished, if heavily guarded, chamber in a castle tower. They would have a bed, with linens, a fireplace to ward off the chill, and meals served on pewter plates, brought from the Lord's own kitchen. They might be allowed books, writing materials, and even occasional, supervised walks in a walled garden. Their jailer was less a guard and more of a personal attendant. This was not an act of kindness. It was a practical necessity. A high-value hostage had to be kept healthy and alive for the ransom to be paid or for the political leverage to be maintained. Yet, this comfortable prison had its own exquisite torture. The prisoner was surrounded by the trappings of their former life, a constant, mocking reminder of their lost freedom and power. Every comfort was a link in a gilded chain, emphasizing their utter dependence on their captors. While the peasant in the pit fought for his next breath, the nobleman in the tower fought the slow, corrosive acid of humiliation and irrelevance. His gilded cage a far more complex, if less physically brutal, form of hell. Each type of dungeon, from the seething pit to the lonely tower, was a mirror, reflecting the rigid and unforgiving class structure of the world that had built it. Trapped in the unchanging environment of the dungeon, you might think you are immune to the turning of the world outside. But the seasons, the great, silent clock of the year, still find ways to impose their will upon you. Their faint, ghostly touch a reminder of the life cycles you are no longer a part of. Winter is the most direct and brutal assault. The pervasive dampness in the stone walls, once a mere discomfort, now becomes a mortal enemy. The water that seeps through the cracks can freeze, coating the walls and floor in a thin, treacherous layer of ice. The cold is no longer a dull ache. It is a sharp, biting thing that feels as if it is splintering your very bones. Any blanket you have feels useless. A thin, pathetic shield against a cold that radiates from the very earth itself. The meager gruel you are given, often served cold, does nothing to warm you from the inside. Your body consumes all its energy simply trying to stay alive, shivering uncontrollably in the dark. The sounds from the world above change, too. The cheerful noises of summer are replaced by the mournful howl of the wind whistling through the castle's arrow slits, a sound that seems to echo the desolation in your own soul. Winter in the dungeon is a time of pure survival, a long, dark tunnel where the primary struggle is to simply keep from freezing solid. Then comes the spring. You do not see the first green shoots or the blossoming of flowers, but you feel the change. The ice on the walls begins to melt, and the constant dripping that was once a maddening clock now becomes a steady, flowing stream. The dungeon becomes even damper than before. The straw on the floor, if you have any, turns into a sodden, rotting mat. The air grows thick with the smell of mold and mildew, a scent of decay that is almost suffocating. But with the thaw comes a sliver of hope, however faint. The air that filters down from above loses some of its biting edge. You might hear the sound of birdsong for the first time in months, a clear, piercing melody that cuts through the gloom and, for a fleeting moment, makes your heart ache with a forgotten sense of beauty. Summer brings a different kind of misery. The world above is alive with warmth and sunshine, but in the dungeon, the air becomes heavy, stagnant, and oppressively hot. With no ventilation, your subterranean cell becomes a sweltering oven. The stench of human waste, which was muted by the cold of winter, now blooms into a gagging, omnipresent miasma. The heat makes the vermin more active. The fleas and lice multiply, their bites a constant, maddening torment on your sweating skin. The rats become bolder, the flies a buzzing, ever-present cloud. The heat saps your strength, leaving you lethargic, your mind dull and unfocused. The worst part of summer is the knowledge of the world you are missing, the long, light-filled evenings, the warmth of the sun on your back, the feeling of cool grass under your feet. While the world above celebrates the peak of life, you are trapped in a hot, stinking tomb, slowly suffocating in the dark. The passing of the seasons is a cruel, invisible tormentor, a constant reminder of the beautiful, natural rhythms of a world from which you have been completely and utterly severed. In the monotonous landscape of your imprisonment, an event of monumental significance might occur a visit. The possibility of it is a source of both frenzied hope and paralyzing dread. The news arrives without warning. The jailer appears at your door, perhaps with another guard, and informs you that you have a visitor. Your heart lurches. Who could it be? Your wife, your son. A lawyer sent by your family. The anticipation is a physical thing, a frantic energy that courses through your weakened body. You are given no time to prepare. You cannot wash your face or change your ragged clothes. You are simply unchained and led, blinking and stumbling, from your cell. The visit rarely takes place in a comfortable room. More often, it happens through the bars of your cell door, or in a small, heavily guarded anteroom. The meeting is a collision of two worlds. Your visitor, let us imagine it is your wife, is clean. Her clothes are bright, She smells of soap and fresh air. You, in contrast, are a creature of the dungeon, emaciated, filthy, smelling of despair. The shock in her eyes when she sees you is a fresh wound. She tries to hide it, but you see it, the pity, the horror, the revulsion. The conversation is a stilted, painful dance, conducted under the watchful, bored gaze of the guards. Time is short. What can be said in 10 minutes that can bridge the chasm of months, or even years, of separation? She brings news from the outside world. News of your children, of the harvest, of village gossip. But the news feels like it's from another planet. You struggle to connect with this life that has moved on without you. You try to tell her of your experience, but the words fail you. How can you describe the darkness? How can you explain the sound of dripping water, the constant fear, the gnawing hunger? Your experience is incommunicable. You can see the frustration and helplessness in her eyes. She wants to help, to comfort you, but she cannot cross the invisible wall that now stands between you. She may have brought something for you, a small parcel of food, a piece of cheese, or a sweet cake. You devour it with a desperate and animalistic haste that shames you both. It is a taste of home, a taste of love, and it is over in an instant. Then, the guard announces that the time is up. This is the cruelest moment of all. You watch as she is led away, her form disappearing down the corridor. You are left with the lingering scent of her perfume in the foul air, a ghost of her presence. You are chained once more, and the door slams shut, the sound of the bolt more final and more deafening than ever before. The visit, which you had so desperately craved, has not brought comfort. It has brought a fresh wave of agonizing loss. It has sharpened the edges of your suffering by giving you a brief, painful glimpse of everything you can no longer have. For days afterward, you are haunted by her face, by her smell, by the news she brought, and the crushing weight of your isolation feels heavier than ever before. The medieval mind was steeped in a world of unseen forces. It was a world populated by saints and demons, ghosts and goblins, where curses were real and omens could be seen in the flight of a bird or the shape of a cloud. The dungeon, a place already on the fringes of the known world, was a natural breeding ground for superstition and folklore. It was a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the spirits felt perilously thin. Prisoners, trapped in darkness and sensory deprivation, their minds already prone to tricks and hallucinations, became acutely sensitive to the supernatural. Every unexplained noise, every draft of cold air, was a sign, a portent, a ghostly presence. The dungeon was not just a physical space, it was a haunted house of the soul. It was widely believed that the spirits of those who died within the walls lingered on. A prisoner who had been murdered, tortured to death, or who had taken their own life in despair was thought to be trapped, their ghost condemned to eternally roam the cell where they had suffered. You might lie awake at night and hear a sound that was not a rat, not another prisoner, but a faint, sighing moan that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. Was it the wind? Or was it the spirit of the man who was forgotten in the cell a century ago? This belief could be a source of terror, the fear of a malevolent spirit adding another layer to your dread. But it could also, strangely, be a source of comfort. The idea that you were not entirely alone, that you shared your suffering with a company of ghosts, could create a grim sense of solidarity with the dead. Omens were seen everywhere. The behavior of the rats was scrutinized with the intensity of a Roman augur. If the rats were bold and numerous, it might be a sign of a long and difficult imprisonment. If they suddenly disappeared, perhaps it meant a change was coming, a release or an execution. A spider spinning a web in a particular shape could be a message from the fates. Even the patterns of mold growing on the damp walls could be interpreted as symbols, crude maps of the future. This search for meaning in the mundane was a desperate attempt to impose some kind of order, some kind of narrative, onto a chaotic and senseless existence. If your fate was written in the patterns of the mold, then at least it was written somewhere. The jailers themselves were often figures of folklore. They were seen as more than just men. They were gatekeepers to the underworld, figures who consorted with the darkness and were touched by its evil. It was rumored that some jailers made pacts with demons to keep their prisoners subdued, or that they possessed the evil eye. To look a jailer directly in the eye was to risk having your soul stolen. These beliefs reinforced the power dynamic, turning the jailer from a simple guard into a supernatural threat. The dungeon, in the prisoner's mind, became a living entity. It was a malevolent beast with stone walls for skin and dark corridors for veins. It actively sought to consume you, to digest your sanity and your hope. Surviving the dungeon was not just a matter of enduring physical hardship. It was a spiritual battle against the unseen forces of darkness. A constant struggle to keep your soul from being devoured by the superstitions and ghosts that thrived in the cold. Oppressive silence. The jailer's power did not reside solely in the keys that hung from his belt or the sword at his side. His authority was maintained through a collection of simple, yet brutally effective, tools that shaped the daily reality of the dungeon. These were not the elaborate devices of the torture chamber, but the mundane instruments of control, each one designed to enforce distance, assert dominance, and manage the human cattle in his care. The most common of these was the pole. For prisoners deemed particularly dangerous or diseased, the jailer would not risk opening the cell door or even the small food slot. Instead, he would use a long wooden pole, perhaps with a hook or a small platform on the end, to push the daily ration of bread and the bowl of gruel into the cell. This simple tool was a powerful symbol of the prisoner's status as an untouchable. It created a physical distance that reinforced their social isolation, treating them as something so contaminated or volatile that even direct physical contact was too great a risk. The act of receiving your food at the end of a 10-foot pole was a profound and daily humiliation. The bucket was another key instrument of the jailer's trade. The delivery of fresh water and the removal of waste were pivotal moments in the dungeon's rhythm, and they were entirely at the jailer's discretion. The same bucket might be used for both tasks, a grim detail that underscored the lack of concern for the prisoner's health. The jailer could use the promise of a clean bucket of water as a reward for information, or the threat of withholding it as a punishment for insubordination. He controlled the most basic elements of sanitation, and in doing so, he controlled the spread of disease and the level of misery within the cells. A kind jailer might order the latrine buckets to be emptied weekly. A cruel or lazy one might leave them to fester for a month, turning the cell into a living cesspool. Light, or the lack of it, was perhaps his most powerful tool. The dungeon was kept in near total darkness by design. But the jailer possessed the ultimate power, the torch. When he entered the corridor, his torch would bring a brief, flickering, and precious light into the prisoner's world. He could use this light as an instrument of interrogation, shining it directly into a prisoner's eyes to disorient and intimidate them. Or he could offer it as a rare commodity. A bribe might buy a prisoner a small, tallow candle, a stub of which would be passed through the bars. For the hour that it burned, the candle was a priceless treasure. It pushed back the oppressive darkness, allowing the prisoner to see the faces of his cellmates, to examine his surroundings, to read a smuggled message, or to simply enjoy the profound comfort of seeing something, anything, other than the blackness. When the candle sputtered and died, plunging the cell back into darkness, the loss was acute. The jailer, by controlling the light, controlled a fundamental aspect of reality, wielding the power of a god who could command the sun to rise and set at his whim. Through these simple, everyday tools, the jailer's tyranny was made absolute, a constant, grinding pressure that regulated every moment of the prisoner's life. The prisoner's fate, and the very nature of their confinement, often depended on a crucial question: who had arrested them. The medieval world was a complex tapestry of overlapping authorities, and the two greatest powers, the church and the secular state, each maintained their own systems of justice and their own prisons. To fall into the hands of a secular lord or king meant entering the world we have largely been exploring, a world of dungeons designed for holding, ransom, and punishment. The primary concerns were security and political expediency. But to be imprisoned by the church was to enter a different, though not necessarily less terrible, realm. The ecclesiastical prison was, in theory, not a place of punishment, but of penance. Its stated goal was not to break the body, but to save the soul. This was the destination for priests who had broken their vows, for monks who had committed grave sins, for nuns accused of immorality, and, most significantly, for those accused of heresy. The conditions could vary dramatically. In some monastic prisons, a fallen monk might be sentenced to a period of solitary confinement in a cell known as in peace, where he was to reflect on his sins, pray for forgiveness, and perform penance. He might receive better food than a secular prisoner and would have access to religious texts. The confinement was a spiritual ordeal, a forced retreat from the world to purify the soul. However, for those accused of heresy, the ecclesiastical prison became indistinguishable from its secular counterpart, and often it was worse. The dungeons of the Inquisition were infamous centers of psychological and physical torment. The interrogators were highly educated theologians, masters at trapping a suspect in a web of theological contradictions. Their goal was a full confession and a renunciation of heretical beliefs, and they would use any means necessary to achieve it. The lines between these two systems often blurred. A secular lord might hand over a suspected heretic to the church authorities for spiritual correction. Conversely, the church, after condemning a heretic, would often hand them back to the secular arm for the final punishment of execution, as church law technically forbade the clergy from shedding blood. This created a terrifying jurisdictional maze for the accused. You could be passed from one authority to another, your fate debated by bishops and barons, each with their own agendas. For the prisoner, this meant a profound uncertainty. The rules of one system did not apply in the other. An appeal to the mercy of a lord was useless if your crime was deemed spiritual. A plea for theological understanding was pointless if your jailer was a common soldier who saw you only as a traitor. You were trapped not just in a physical cell, but in a labyrinth of power, a pawn in the great, ongoing struggle for dominance between the temporal and the spiritual. Your life a footnote in the grand, pitiless history of church and state. For the condemned prisoner, the final weight culminates in one last terrible journey. It begins with the sound of the jailer's footsteps, but this time they are accompanied by others, the guards, the priest, perhaps the executioner himself. There is a grim finality in their arrival. The door to your cell groans open, and for the last time, you are unchained from the wall. Your hands are bound tightly behind your back. The priest may offer a final, hurried prayer, His words a soft drone against the pounding of your own heart. Then you are led out of the dungeon, up the stairs, and back into the world. The shock of the light and sound is even more intense than it was at your trial, because you know this is the last time you will ever experience it. Every sensation is amplified, imbued with a terrible, poignant significance. You feel the warmth of the sun on your face, a warmth you have craved for so long, and you know it is the last warmth you will ever feel. You are led through the castle gates and into the town square, where a crowd has gathered. The mood is not somber, it is festive. This is a public holiday, a spectacle, a form of entertainment. Vendors sell pies and ale. Children sit on their father's shoulders for a better view. You are the center of it all, the star of this brutal theater. The crowd jeers, they throw refuse, they hurl insults. You are paraded through their midst, a final act of public humiliation. You try to hold your head high, to find a single friendly face in the sea of mocking, curious stares, but there are none. You are an object, a thing to be destroyed for their amusement and their moral instruction. Finally, you reach the scaffold. It is a crude wooden platform, stark and imposing against the sky. You are forced up the steps, your legs weak and trembling. From this vantage point, you can see the entire crowd, the rooftops of the town, the green fields beyond. You see the whole world that you are about to leave. The executioner, often a hooded figure to preserve his anonymity, waits impassively. The charges against you are read out one last time. Your sins listed for all to hear. You may be given the chance to say a few last words. Some prisoners use this opportunity to confess and beg for mercy. Others used it to make a final, defiant speech, to curse the king or the judge who had condemned them. But most were too terrified to speak, their throats tight with fear. Then the final preparations are made. If you are to be hanged, the rough hempen noose is placed around your neck. If you are to be beheaded, you are forced to kneel, your head placed on a wooden block. In these last, heart-stopping seconds, your life flashes before you, not as a long, continuous narrative, but as a series of brilliant, painful snapshots of love, of loss, of simple, forgotten moments of happiness. The priest utters a final, "May God have mercy on your soul," and then there is a signal, a sudden movement, and the world dissolves into either a sharp, cracking oblivion or a final, choking darkness. Your private suffering in the dungeon is over, transformed at last into a shared, public, and brutal memory. Let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves a question. Why does the image of the dungeon hold such a powerful, enduring grip on our collective imagination? It's more than just the fear of darkness or confinement. The dungeon, at its core, was not merely a prison. It was a profound and terrifying statement of power. Its very existence, hidden away beneath the grandeur of a castle or the authority of a town hall, was a constant, unspoken threat. It was the ultimate expression of the state's or the Lord's authority over the individual. It represented the place where the rules of society, the bonds of community, and even the light of God ceased to apply. To cast someone into the dungeon was to declare that they were no longer a person in the eyes of the law. They were an object, a piece of property to be held, broken, or discarded at will. The physical reality of the dungeon, its thick walls, its heavy doors, its deep, oppressive silence was a mirror of the absolute and unassailable power of the ruler. It was a clear message to all. This is what happens when you defy the established order. This is the consequence of challenging our authority. The darkness of the dungeon was the shadow cast by the throne. The medieval dungeon, in its raw brutality, forces us to reflect on how our very concept of justice has evolved. The system that fed the dungeon was one rooted in public spectacle and physical retribution. Justice was a communal event. Punishments like the stocks and the pillory and public executions were forms of theater meant to educate and terrify the populace into compliance. The dungeon was an extension of this philosophy, a hidden stage for the prelude to that final, public act. There was little to no concept of rehabilitation or reform. The idea that a prison could be a place to correct a person's behavior would have been utterly alien. The dungeon reflected a worldview where suffering was seen as a necessary and just component of punishment. It was about retribution, not restoration. Comparing this to our modern ideal of a penitentiary, a place for penance and reform, reveals a fundamental shift in our understanding of human nature and the purpose of law. The cold, damp stones of the medieval dungeon stand as a stark monument to a time when justice was not about fixing a broken person, but about demonstrating the terrifying consequences of being broken. And yet, even in a place designed to strip away all humanity, humanity endured. It's in the faint, ghostly traces the prisoners left behind that we find the most poignant reflections. Those crude carvings on the wall, a name, a cross, a date, are far more than simple graffiti. They are an echo of the inextinguishable human spirit. In a place built to erase them, they fought to be remembered. In a world of total powerlessness, the act of scratching one's name into stone was a final, defiant act of agency. It was a declaration that said, "I may be a prisoner, but I am still me. I existed. I felt. I mattered." These marks connect us to them across the centuries, bridging the vast gap of time with a shared understanding of fear, hope, and the profound need to leave a trace of oneself behind. They remind us that even when confronted with the absolute void, the human soul instinctively reaches for a form of immortality, a way to whisper its story to the future. The stones of the dungeon were meant to be a testament to the power of the king, but these faint carvings transformed them into a testament to the resilience of the common man. The physical dungeons of the Middle Ages now lie mostly empty, silent relics for tourists to wander through. But the idea of the dungeon is more alive than ever. It has become a powerful archetype in our stories, our films, our games. It is a potent symbol in our shared cultural language. In our modern storytelling, the dungeon represents the ultimate place of trial. It is the place where heroes are tested, where secrets are kept, where the darkest fears are confronted. It symbolizes the subconscious, the hidden depths of the human psyche, the things we lock away. It is the place of the monster, the labyrinth, the treasure, the escape. This enduring legacy shows how deeply the dungeon taps into our primal fears, the fear of the dark, of being trapped, of being forgotten, of the unknown that lurks just beneath the surface of our civilized world. The stone and iron may have crumbled to dust, but the shadow of the dungeon continues to stretch long and deep into our modern imagination, a timeless symbol of captivity, mystery, and the terrifying possibility of what lies beneath. Imagine that dungeon now, if you will. The heavy door stands ajar, not with force, but with the quiet indifference of time. Moonlight, pale and soft, spills onto the stone floor for the first time in centuries, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the still air. The chains lie coiled on the ground, their rust blending with the color of the earth. The walls are empty now, holding nothing but the faint, almost invisible carvings left by souls long departed. The air is no longer thick with fear, but with a cool, clean scent of night and ancient stone. There are no more whispers, no more groans, no more rattling of iron. There is only a profound and final silence. The rats have gone. The jailer's footsteps have long since faded. The suffering has ended. The dungeon is no longer a prison. It is just a room, a quiet, empty space beneath the earth. Its purpose fulfilled, its story told. The countless souls who were once held within these walls have long been released, not by a king's pardon, but by time itself. Their pain, their fear, their brief, flickering hopes have all dissolved back into the great, silent river of history. Their names whispered in darkness and carved into stone are now just echoes. They have found their peace. The world that built these dungeons, a world of harsh justice and open cruelty, has also faded, replaced by one that, for all its flaws, strives for something more. The stories of these prisoners, once lost to the darkness, now serve as a quiet reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and of the preciousness of the freedom we so often take for granted. Their long night is over, and now your own night is drawing to a close. You are safe, warm, and free. You are in your bed, a world away from the cold stone and damp chill we have just visited. There are no chains to bind you, no darkness to fear. The only thing that holds you now is the gentle weight of your blanket. Let the oppressive silence of the dungeon transform into the peaceful quiet of your room. Let the darkness behind your eyelids be a soft, comforting curtain, not a wall. The suffering of the past is just a story now, a distant whisper to help you appreciate the profound peace of the present moment. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just breathe. Sleep now. The stone walls have forgotten their sorrow, and only a deep, restful silence remains. Let that silence be your lullaby. The story is over, and a night of peaceful, uninterrupted sleep is waiting for you. Dream of kinder centuries, and rest well. We will meet again on another journey into the past. Good night.